Where do you think COVID came from?
COVID, the question is which lab and in which way. It almost surely did not come out of nature. It almost surely came out of a deliberate research project that had a core idea, which was to take a natural virus and make it more infectious. And we have one major blueprint of that, which is a research proposal called Diffuse, which was submitted to the Department of Defense, to the unit called DARPA, in 2018. And it is a kind of cookbook for how to make the virus that causes COVID-19. And the virus is called SARS-CoV-2. And what's distinctive about SARS-CoV-2 is that it has something called a proteolytic cleavage site, and specifically something called a furin cleavage site. And it's just some pieces of the genome that make this thing damn infectious. Yeah. And what's interesting about it is that for this class of bat viruses, which are called beta coronaviruses, which is what SARS comes from and what COVID-19 comes from, for that class of viruses, and there are several hundred known, none of them in nature ever had that particular piece of the genome called none other than SARS-CoV-2. And that piece of the genome, the furin cleavage site, was an object of research attention from 2005, because it was understood that if a virus were to have that, it would make the entry of the virus into human cells easier, and it would make the virus, therefore, infectious for humans. SARS-1, which is the first outbreak of a virus like this in 2003 in Hong Kong, was most likely a natural virus that came from a farm animal. And it was not so infectious. It killed some thousands of people. But with SARS-1, you got very, very sick for weeks before you were infectious to someone else. And that meant that it was not so hard to stop by isolating people who had the symptoms. With SARS-CoV-2, you are infectious even without any symptoms. Sometimes you're completely asymptomatic. So what's the difference of SARS-1 and SARS-CoV-2? The furin cleavage site. And in 2005 already, so almost 20 years ago, that experiment was done that said, oh, take SARS-1, add in a furin cleavage site, this thing becomes really infectious. And there are a series of experiments, 2005, 2009, 2011, that are called gain-of-function experiments, where you deliberately manipulate the virus to make it more infectious. By 2015, we had a full-blown research program funded by NIH, by Tony Fauci's unit, on beta coronaviruses, already with the lead scientists focusing on this furin cleavage site. It's starting to get, so they're starting to do more and more targeted experiments.
May I ask why?
Yes.
Why would you want to take a virus like that and make it more infectious?
The overarching answer is called biodefense. And and then the real question, which I don't know the answer to, is that biowarfare or is that true defense? NIH, starting in 2001, became the Defense Department's research unit. So remember the anthrax attack that came after 9/11?
Very well.
Yes. After that,
I'm sorry to ask you, pause. Do we know, or are you satisfied you know what that was?
that probably came out of AMRID. It was probably a U.S., some U.S. scientists either
for sure
provoking or doing some crazy things or disgruntled or boosting up the DoD budget. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I know that after that, DoD put its budget through Tony Fauci's unit. which suddenly became the largest unit of NIH, and Fauci became the head of what is politely called biodefense. But one only suspects that we're not supposed to do biowarfare.
It used to be called germ warfare, right?
Right. And I don't know. And they say, well, it's for vaccines against biowarfare. It's to defend against it. It's to defend against natural outbreaks. But what it is a tremendously dangerous research program that involves a lot of manipulation of very dangerous pathogens. And by 2015, the ability of scientists to manipulate these viruses was reaching astounding proportions. And we've got a real genius who was part of this group named Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, who is a genius. And what he could do was, if you gave him 30,000 letters of the DNA code, A, G, C, C, G, A, and so forth, and I mean give him the letters, he'll turn that into a live virus. I think that's pretty damn remarkable. In other words, you give him the designer virus, he'll give you the live virus. And he created what's called a reverse genetic system to make these viruses and to put in pieces into the viruses with a technique which he also called no-seum, meaning you suture in a part, but you do it in a way that you can't identify that it was put in the lab, so it's without the fingerprints, as it were. And it's clear that this area of research picked up a tremendous amount of steam because a lot of American scientists were shouting, "This is so damn dangerous, stop it." And Fauci was saying, no, this is important. This is really crucial. We're going to continue to do this. There was a brief moratorium at the end of the Obama period, and then the moratorium was lifted during the Trump administration. And even during the moratorium period, we know that the research continued on many grants. It's clear when you look closely at this that they were getting closer and closer to this insertion of the furin cleavage site into SARS-like viruses. Now, in 2018 came this proposal. As always, this was a highly classified proposal. We only learned about it after the fact by a whistleblower. We never even would have learned about it, even in all of the commotion of the pandemic, but for a whistleblower, a brave whistleblower in the Department of Defense who said the public needs to see this. And when you look at the diffuse proposal, really you say, holy shit, because on page 10, it says, we have collected more than 180 previously unreported beta coronaviruses. And on page 11, it says we're going to test them for whether they have a proteolytic cleavage site, which is a furin cleavage site. And if they don't, we're going to insert a furin cleavage site into them. It's the goddamn cookbook for how to make this virus. So here comes the Defense Department turned it down, supposedly. I mean, probably did. And then comes the question, well, so what happened? Well, the people that wrote that little cookbook said, not us. We didn't do anything like that. No, it got turned down. Nothing to look at here. And there are I know because people have told me, oh, Jeff, it's not just that it got turned down. They had done the work even before they submitted the grant proposal. That's not uncommon in science, which is you do a lot of the work beforehand. So I've heard that on good authority. I can't verify it personally. And there are so many strands now that say, yeah, something really screwy was going on. For example, there's a very weird paper, weird to me, by Barrick and the head of what's called Rocky Mountain Laboratory, which is a NIH laboratory under Fauci's authority. that reports this completely bizarre finding. And the finding sounds very technical, but it says the Wuhan Institute of Virology type 1 virus does not infect Egyptian fruit bats. Okay, that's the title. So you say, so what the hell is that? What that is that obviously in 2019 and 2018, they were doing experiments using viruses from Wuhan in the Rocky Mountain labs with their collection of bats. Okay, so one theory, and the bats in Rocky Mountain labs is called an Egyptian fruit bat. It's not the kind of bat that carries this virus in China, which is in Yunnan, which is a different kind of bat. But they tried it in Rocky Mountain lab. I scratched my head and said, what the hell? We have Rocky Mountain Lab doing experiments with Wuhan viruses in Montana in NIH labs with Ralph Barrick, who is one of the principal investigators of the insert the furin cleavage site into the virus. I'd like to know more about that. Thank you. Isn't that curious? Then there are other scientists that have pieces of this puzzle. So the answer is we don't know exactly. One theory is that it was concocted in the U.S. and sent over to Wuhan, to this Wuhan Institute of Virology for testing in their bat collection, which is the Chinese bats rather than the Egyptian fruit bats. That's plausible. That's one person's theory. There are other theories that even a related research group, of German and Dutch, may have played a role because they have in Wuhan research. But when the virus broke out in that period at the end of 2019, early 2020, there's commotion among the scientists. What the hell is this? Where'd this come from? Oh my God, did we do this? How'd this escape? Or whatever. Nobody knows, of course. So they start having secret calls. And one of the most important of these calls was on February 1st, 2020. That was then memorialized by one of the participants in a long memo, all of which became public through a Freedom of Information Act subsequently, because our government has lied to us about every single moment of this from the start, hasn't told us anything about any of this. It's all whistleblowers or Freedom of Information Act. That's the only way we know any of what I'm describing to you right now. No one has told the truth at all. So on the February 1st call, the scientists say, oh, God, this looks like a lab stuff. One of them says, I can't figure out how this could have ever come out of nature. And they're all looking at the furin cleavage site because they know, this group of scientists knows that's the object of research. That's the goal. It's never been seen before in a virus like this. It's, it's the signature right there. I did this. And 4 days later, that group authors the first draft of a paper called The Proximal Origins of SARS-CoV-2 that says it's a natural virus.
The same people wrote it?
The same people who privately said it's out of a lab, most likely.
So it's just, that is provably a cover-up then?
That's a cover-up. This paper is a fraud. It has not been retracted until today. And it's a fraud.
Where did it run?
It ran in Nature Medicine in March 20.